I've spoken to people, many people lately, and people ask me, what do you think from a community perspective, from a Jewish community perspective, is the hardest things about all these lockdowns. Um, and of course, on a personal level, there's the mental health effects of all these situations, the up and downs, the not knowing what's going on, and then there's the other issues of just being locked away for long is generally probably not good for most people's nerves. And then on a communal piece, a Jewish community is people kind of get comfortable at home and don't want to go back out, don't want to venture out, not comfortable, don't feel safe, don't want to go back to shul. So I've personally found that shul has been, and I think many rabbis would probably agree with me, that shul has been one of the things that's harder for people to reconnect with. My apologies. You see this camera? That's why I changed cameras. Now you see what's going on. Now let's jump in, jump in, jump in. So the truth is that we always struggle with shul. Shul, struggling with shul is not really a new phenomenon. It's something that.
Hang on. I think your connection is not good. Maybe the port, unplug and replug it. Because there's also static, not just the jumping.
Okay, let's just see if that's any better. Could you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
so the problem that I find with with uh, with shul in particular is that as individuals, most people in today's day and age that are not regular shul goers, or that, and even regular shul goers, I should say, find it difficult to connect to davening, and they find davening boring, to be quite honest. Um, and the question is, what would we need to do to change that? What would we need to make davening more interesting and less monotonous? So, to guide us through that, we're going to read today's Mishnah. Um, I'm just going to try to share it. Today's Mishnah is by a man named Rab Shimon ben Nesanel. And as we have been discussing in the previous weeks, Shimon ben Nesanel is one of the 5 great students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So we're still in the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and those that joined us on Saturday night would have heard once again the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So today, it's Rabbi Shimon. Now, I just want to, before we actually read Rabbi Shimon, I want to see the praise. If you recall, Rabbi Yochanan gave a particular praise to each of his students. So I'd like to have a look at the praise of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to his student. If you look over here, Rabbi Shimon. How did I know that his name is Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel? Because actually, initially, his name was given. Sometimes we call a person, the rabbis were called just by their name, Rabbi Shimon. But usually, if there was other Rabbi Shimons, that were also the rabbis of the Mishnah, that would sometimes call them by the other name, and then later on you would figure it out. But his praise was he was Yurechet. He was sin fearing. He never sinned, and he was afraid to sin. That was the praise. So what we do know about Rabbi Shimon is that there's another famous Rabbi Shimon that lives in the next generation, whose name is Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. This is the generation of Rabbi Akiva. These people would have all been colleagues of Rabbi Akiva and studied and argued with him, debated with him in the academies. But the next generation, the following generation, the student, the great one of the great students of Rabbi Akiva, is of course Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is the author of the Zohar. But we're told about this Rabbi Shimon that he was a Kabbalist par excellence, similar to the level of Shimon Bar Yochai. Now that's important because we know that Rabbi Akiva was also one of the great Kabbalists of the time, and that's why his student Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai also. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai doesn't come about in a vacuum. You don't have this great Kabbalistic movement in a vacuum out of nowhere. He doesn't just suddenly come up with ideas. No, he has teachers. We understand that of the scholars of the Mishna, for example, the Talmud and the Mishnah, not all of them would have necessarily focused on Kabbalistic teachings. We know that Rabbi Akiva had a focus on both. Rabbi Shimon had a focus on both. Rabbi Shimon had a big focus on it, and he actually wrote them down. There's a famous book called the Book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah, which is attributed to Rabbi Akiva. And that's how you could understand that if Rabbi Akiva wrote the Sefer Yetzirah, you could understand how his student, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, would write the Zohar, because they are both Kabbalistic works. But this Rabbi Shimon is also one of those great Kabbalists. And he was told, another similarity that he had to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is that the Talmud says about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Torato emunato. His Torah was his work, was what he did all the time. He never stopped studying. And the law is that if a person is a person that never takes a break from studying, except for when he has to eat and sleep, and all his other time he uses for study, then he doesn't have to even stop for prayer. But anybody that does not study all day does have to stop for prayer. Right? Now there's another man by the name of Shimon ben Hasanel that ends up marrying the daughter of Rabbi Gamliel, who was the Nasi, the leader of the time, the spiritual leader. But most people think that the characteristics don't fit with this Shimon ben Hasanel, and therefore it must have been another rabbi. That's almost about as much as we know about this Rabbi Shimon. There's not much more that I know about him. So let's read his statement. He says, statement number 1, Hevei Zahir b'kriyat Shema u'v'tfilah. Be careful, meticulous with the reading of the Shema, and the Tfilah is the davening, the prayer. Now, the word Tfilah simply means prayer, but generally in halachic terms, whenever we say the word Tfilah, we are actually referring to the Amidah. We don't know if we believe that Rabbi Shimon would not have done the full prayers every day because he was not obligated to do it, because as I mentioned earlier, Torah emunato, he didn't stop learning, and therefore he would not have been obligated to do the full prayer. But what he would have done is he would have been careful to do every day the Shema and at least the Amidah, the most basic prayers. Now the Shema, even if you are Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and you never stop learning, or Rabbi Shimon ben Hasanel, you still have to say the Shema every day. Here's something that when he's saying be meticulous, he's talking about two things about being meticulous. I'd love to know if anybody could think of what are the two things that he's being careful. What is he asking? What do you think he's telling us to be careful about when it comes to Shema and Tefillah? What do you think those things are?
I'll hazard a guess.
Go ahead.
Well, the pronunciation of the word echad, the dalet.
Okay, interesting.
Is one. And the covenant, I guess the intention, as when saying it not by rote, but actually putting thought into each word, into the sentiment of the words.
Okay, very interesting. Noah, were you going to say something similar?
I was going to say kavanah and not to get distracted. Okay. So not to let your mind wander to other stuff.
Okay. I actually didn't think of those things. I know that sounds surprising, but that's not what I understood it. But I'm pretty sure that your explanations are correct. What I think that so the basic commentary says Zahir, he was actually talking about the time, that you have to make sure that you do it in the correct time. That's the basic understanding. Because, and here's an interesting law that not many people know. When I say not many people know, it's not well known, but it's actually a biblical law that there's a particular time that we're obligated from the Torah to say Shema. Right? The Torah says, you'll teach it to your children, you'll speak of them. When you lie down and when you get up. Now the Mishna in Brachot, and I can see Joe, you've probably learned this one before. It says that b'shachbacha means when you lie down, it has to be nighttime after nightfall. And there's a whole debate when nightfall starts, when that obligation starts. And uvkumecha, when you get up. What's considered morning? So he's telling us there's the most ideal time to do it, which is just before sunrise in the morning. That's called Neitzachama. And then straight after Neitzachama, after the sunrise, you should do the Amidah. So in the davening, even if you do the full long davening, you have all the introductory prayers. So the best way to do it, you would daven. Let's say now in the winter, the sunrise is officially around, I think it's probably around 7:20 or something like that in the morning, maybe 7:30. So you would daven that you would try to get to the Shema just before 7:20, so that straight after sunrise, you would try to daven the Amidah. Because ideally you should not daven the Amidah before sunrise, but you can say the Shema anytime after dawn, which is much earlier. So there's dawn and sunrise. However, biblically, you feel that's the ideal way to do it. But biblically, the biblical obligation to say the Shema goes 3 hours into the day. From the day is divided by how long do you have of daylight time? Let's say there's 15 hours of daylight time, right? You would divide that amount of time by 12, and therefore the hour would be longer. Let's say it would be end up 75 minutes of daylight time, right? And you divide that, and that's how you get to 3 hours. 3 times 75. So for example, now the latest time to say the Shema is around 10 o'clock in the morning. If you want to fulfill the biblical obligation of saying the Shema, it would be before around 10 o'clock in the morning. Of course, this changes summer and winter, and particularly daylight savings. But that's the time currently, around 10 o'clock. And the time of prayer is actually an hour later, 4 hours into the day. Right? Once again, we're not talking about regular 60-minute hours. We're talking about an hour based on the amount of daylight time. 1/12 of the daylight time, that's what equals an hour. All right. So that's number one, what he's talking about. We could talk about this for a long time, but I just wanted to explain what he's talking about. The second point that he's talking about, of course, by the way, the nighttime, the same thing applies, that the biblical obligation, ideally we do it straight after it becomes dark, which is after actual nightfall. So it has to be nightfall, not sunset, right? The day is also split into different parts. There's sunset, and then there's nightfall. Those are two different things known in Hebrew as Shkiat Hachama and Tzetach Kachavim, the coming out of the stars. Those are two different times. And there's actually debate in Halacha which part is exactly and how much, what exactly are considered. I'm sure you're aware of this discussion. You know that Shabbat, people say we don't take out Shabbos until there's, I remember, have you ever watched the Frisco Kid, right? You watch the Frisco Kid and they're running away from somebody and they stop for Shabbos, and the rabbi, he says his travel companion says, "Can we go now? Can we go now?" And as the sun goes away, he says, "No!" And then they quickly hit on their horses and they go. Of course, that's halachically incorrect because it was only sunset, and Shabbos goes not till sunset, but till nightfall. But at least it was interesting that they actually brought it out. And then there's this concept of 3 stars, and even that concept is not 100% exact. Sometimes it could be less than 3 stars. What happens if it's cloudy? But sometimes it's more than 3 stars. It's really a time, and we go through some of the later opinions of when nightfall is. And if you go,
he must have belonged to the Reform group.
Well, the way he was talking with the woman later, if he's the rabbi, not I'm just kidding. Anyway, I think it was anyway. It was something I didn't know exactly, but trying to make a Jewish version of real Orthodoxy. But it's a kid. It was one of the first movies I watched as a kid. Okay. The second thing I think he's saying is to be careful about the words. And the third thing that I would definitely think he's agreeing, I think he's also saying to be careful about the concentration. And we know that biblically with the Shema, in order to fulfill the obligation of Shema, you actually have to concentrate on the first line of Shema, the translation, and particularly as Joe mentioned, not necessarily the Dalet, by the way. It's important that some people think it's echad, and some people say emphasize the d, and they end up adding a vowel, which is the shva, the two dots, and that could be a mistake. It's more lengthening the amount that you think. You're supposed to think that the word echad, which means one, stands for one God, seven heavens, one earth, and the four corners of the world, that God provides all of that. Okay? And so it's about being meticulous on the concentration of those things, and also in davening, the concentration of the davening. So thanks for that point as well. Okay. Now, this is the point that I really wanted to talk about, even though we've already spent so much time on the earlier points. Now, when you do daven, he says, Al tas tfilatcha keva. Don't make your prayer, don't do it routine, but rather what should you feel? Rachamim v'tachnunim lifnei hamakom. It should be merciful and supplications before God. One of the names that we used to call God is Hamakom, the place. Discussion for another time. Shenemar, because it says in the verse, Ki chanun v'rachum hu, that God is graceful and merciful. Erech hapayim, he's slow to anger. V'rav chesed, abundant of kindness. V'nicham al hara, and he, they say, relenting over the evil decree. He forgives for evil. Okay. And then the last point, which is another separate point almost, don't consider yourself to be a wicked person. Of course, it's connected, but it is really a separate point. So let's look a bit into this discussion of what he wants us. He doesn't like the concept. He doesn't want us. You have to go?
No, I was saying hi to Yochanan.
Oh, okay. I didn't see somebody else arrived. He's telling us when we do daven, don't make it for the right. Now, this is a real challenge, especially, and you would think especially for people that daven 3 times a day, because if you're doing the same thing 3 times a day, how much excitement and fervor, how much passion could you have in your prayer when you're doing the same thing? How meaningful is it going to really be? That's the question. So he says the main thing is to make sure that there's a rachamim and tachanunim. You have to ask for mercy and for grace. So in other words, the way I'm understanding him, what he's to say, is to find something particularly that you want to ask God's mercy for in every single prayer. So this concept is, of course, one of the broadest concepts within Judaism, the concept of prayer. There's 2 ways that we connect to Hashem in general in a meaningful way. What I'm saying is we connect to Hashem through everything we do, through eating, through drinking, through doing mitzvahs, through charity, through lulav and etrog, through all our mitzvahs. But that connection to Hashem is not necessarily so conscious, not so felt. The 2 ways that we meaningfully, as and we actually feel it, is through davening and through study of Torah. And that's the really important point. The study of Torah is when we involve our mind in the study of godly concepts or godly laws. Prayer is different. Prayer is about us forming a connection with God. It's about, Chassidus says about prayer, sulam mutzav arza. It's a ladder going upwards. You start on the bottom of the ladder and you trying to make your way up. Ideally, prayer should be the most meaningful part of our day, because that's your way of forging a connection with you. When you study Torah, you're trying to bring godliness into your mind. You take ideas from a godly perspective, divine ideas, and you're putting them into your mind. But when you're davening, it's the opposite way around. You're trying to, from your own mind, understand God, to appreciate Him, to appreciate what you have. And that's why davening is so long. Why is it so long? Because as human beings, we really struggle. So we go through all these pre-verses, which is known as Psuke de Zimra, verses of prayer, of praise, and mainly from Tehillim, that if we were to actually pay attention to them, we would have a tremendous feeling of awe and love towards Hashem during our prayer. So here's the tips that mainstream tips that are given within Judaism when you're talking about prayer. What should you do? What should you think about if you're struggling to find any passion in your prayer? 3 basic tips. Number 1, think about the miracles and that have happened historically, and the miracles that continue to happen in our daily lives. Think about something, a particular miracle that you connect with from the past, or something in your life that you consider miraculous. That's one idea given. The second idea given is to think and stop for a moment before you pray and say, who am I praying to? Where am I praying? Who am I praying to? I'm praying to God. If you think I'm praying to the King, if you think about in whose presence you are, who you're talking to, that automatically changes the perspective. Very often, when we're praying, we're just saying words, and that's the problem, right? We're just saying words, and we're just trying to get over the words. If we were to stop for a moment and say, who are we praying to? Why am I saying these words? Who's actually listening to these words? And I stop and I realize, hey, I'm actually talking to Hashem, to God. Then what does it remind us of? It reminds us of our mission within our prayer, that we're trying to connect to Hashem. We're trying to connect to Hashem. And then when you think about that, that will cause you to think about God's mercy and graciousness. And you will then pray for what you need. It's always important to have a personal moment within our prayer. There's halacha says that when you're davening the Amidah, there's things that you should think about. There's so many things that you should be thinking about. It's particularly the first prayer. But if you can't concentrate everything, says halacha, think about one thing, just one thing. I am now talking to God, the creator of everything. That's it. If it's too difficult, and I'm sure it's very difficult for most of us, particularly in today's age of ADD and lack of concentration for a big percentage of the population, myself included. Just if we remind ourselves, then just do it then. I used to have one of my teachers as a child, or not as a child, as a student, Rabbi Kesselman. He used to say, the second you realize that you haven't been concentrating in your prayer, that moment start concentrating. Don't say, oh, I've messed up. I've missed out all the beginning part of the prayer. I haven't thought about anything for the last half an hour I've been praying. I've just been doing it by rote. Right now you realize, start thinking now. Yeah, it may only last 30 seconds. The great Mashpia of Mendel Futterfass used to say that there's two types of prayers. There's some people that are able to concentrate on one thing the whole time while they're praying. And then some people, they're concentrating on a million things. But what he explained himself to mean was, some people, they go into prayer and they're able to concentrate and stick with it the whole time. Some people, they go into prayer and they don't even start, and they're just thinking they're elsewhere the whole time. They're not even trying to pay attention. And there's some people that want to pay attention, but their mind keeps on drifting. So they keep on going and coming back and going and coming back. He says the greatest prayer is the one of the person that can't, but he's keep on trying. And every time he realizes that he's drifted away, he reminds himself and he does something. And for a moment, even if it's a short moment, he actually does think about God, the one that he's praying to. And the third great tip that rabbis give, or they've given, is to just stop and think about what do the words mean. Just stop, take one prayer a day, and just think about those words. That will add tremendous value and meaning to that day. Just taking one prayer. Don't have to do all the prayers and think about everything and have deep meditations and everything. Take one prayer, think about it. That'll be meaningful for you. The next point that I wanted to mention is that Rabbi Shimon, I mentioned before, I started off the shir with saying that Rabbi Shimon said that he was a God-fearing person. What do you think the connection to his statement is, and the praise that he was giving as God-fearing or sin-fearing? What do you see the connection as being to what we explained now? Do you see any connection between the praise that Rabbi Shimon is a sin-fearing and this statement? Okay. I'll tell you what the way I understand the connection. My understanding of the connection, and I think it's not just my own, but it's brought down by others, is that they say if you want to have a feeling of awe for Hashem that ultimately would lead you away from doing sins, spend a few days, spend time in proper prayer. When you have meaningful prayer, then you meaningfully connect to Hashem and you don't want to distract from that. Therefore, you would feel the fear of distracting from that awesome connection to have to Hashem that you achieved through your davening, that you know that you have, whether you daven or not, but you actually felt it. And therefore, when if you were to be tested in any particular way, you would be able to withstand that test. So that's the connection that is made between God-fearing. In other words, why was Rabbi Shimon so God-fearing? Because he had such meaningful prayer. If you have someone that has extremely meaningful Torah study, he probably would be very well acquainted with the mitzvot and have lots of passion around the mitzvot, because that's what Torah study ultimately is. But to have the connection, not to want to break that connection, which is the sin, so to speak, a feeling of severity, that comes through the davening. That's the davening connection. Okay, let's just talk I've gone a little bit over time, and I wanted to end with a quick story, but before I go with that story, I wanted to just ask you what your thoughts are on this statement. Do not be wicked in your own eyes. What's the basic understanding, the deeper understanding? Anybody? Just shed some light on that.
All right, I'll get over my shyness and comment. Self-fulfilling prophecies is the way I see it, is, and it overlaps with psychology, with the science view as well, is that if you see yourself as bad or wicked, then you'll basically give yourself permission to fulfill that vision, to act and think that way. So it's your own self-perception. Don't negative self-talk.
That's right. 100%. So that's obviously the basic understanding of this concept. Don't be a Russian. Nach, you want to add anything?
No, just give yourself a break.
Okay. Alti Russia b'fnei atzmacha. 100%, Joe. I couldn't have said it better. Actually, the Alter Rebbe brings us in the first chapter of Tanya that there's another place in the Talmud that says that you should always be like a Russia in your eyes, which is a contradictory statement. He brings this statement from Pirkei Avot, but over here you clearly said not to. And he goes on to explain that kurash, in other words, recognize that you have the ability to sin, but not that you are a sinner. Because when you define yourself as being something negative, then you start to believe that you are, and you will ultimately start acting in that way. But we know that this is an extremely powerful line, Al Tirasha Bifnei Atzmacha. And that's why whenever you meet people and they say, listen, Rabbi, I'm not religious, I don't do anything. Well, what does that mean? They're trying to say that I can't because this is the way I've defined myself, and that ends up being a huge blockage to them. No, define yourself as a growing Jew, no matter what level of religiosity or observance you're standing at. Never define yourself in the negative. And that's the same is for everything. And going back to what the statement of my teacher when I was younger about you praying, you could think to yourself, I've gone through most of the Amidah. I've gone through 45 minutes of praying. I haven't thought about a single word that I was saying. Actually, as a matter of fact, I was thinking about something totally antithetical to the words of my prayer. And now I'm going to start thinking about my prayer. He said, yes, especially then. Don't start saying, oh, it's worthless now. Because when you do that, what ends up happening, you become apathetic. You stop caring. You don't care about being you become indifferent to all of Jewish practice, to do indifferent to wanting to improve, because you've decided that you cannot, that you aren't that, that's just not you. But when you say, no, I'm not this, I'm a growing Jew. Yeah, I may not be the most observant, but never say I will never be a observant Jew. But observance is not, it's not a thing, it's not a status. It's Judaism's about growth. No one is a Rasha. Or we should never consider ourselves Rasha, never could say that we are something that we aren't, that we're wicked. We should be aware of our flaws and aware of our abilities, but we should also be aware of our ability to grow. And that we are on the right, as long as we then will do that, we'll be in the right trajectory and hopefully go in that direction. It's about Judaism, in my opinion, it's not about how observant you are or not. It's about which direction you're going. Are you going up the ladder or are you going down the ladder? You could start up on the top and be going down, you're heading in the wrong direction, even though you're in the top. But if you're starting on the bottom and you're going up, you're heading the right direction. And it's more than what rung you are, it's the direction that you're going. And that's what's important in Judaism. Of course, you want to try to achieve a certain thing and to have goals or whatever it is. But Judaism is about growth. And this is a very hindering statement. Okay, I want to just conclude. If there's any comments or arguments, you're welcome to say that. I just want to conclude with the story because today's focus was about prayer. So one of the great stories of the Arizal, and there's similar stories of the Baal Shem Tov. But the one story of the Arizal was, of course, we know that the father of modern Kabbalah is the Arizal, 16th century Rabbi Isaac Luria, whose yahrzeit was 2 weeks ago. Sorry, not even 2 weeks ago, 8 days ago, the 5th of Av. The Arizal once had some type of vision after Rosh Hashanah that there was a particular Jew that had the most special and meaningful davening. This Jew lived in a far-off town. So the Arizal, after the high holidays, he traveled to this town and he found this Jew. And he said to the Jew, tell me, what did you do during your prayers? And the Jew said the truth. He was all embarrassed. This great rabbi is asking about his prayers. He said, I didn't do anything. He says, oh, what do you mean? I know that you had a special prayer. He says, to tell you the truth, not only do I not have a special prayer, I don't even know how to pray. Not only do I not know how to pray, I only know the first 10 letters of the Jewish alphabet, of the alphabet. So the Arizal said, well, I know that something very special happened during your prayer. He says, I'll tell you what happened. I went to shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and I saw everybody praying with deep concentration and tears streaming down their faces, And I yearned to be able to pray and to have the meaning of prayer that these people were having. But I couldn't even read the words. All I knew were the first 10 letters of the alphabet. So I started saying with deep passion and meaning each of the 10 letters of the alphabet: Aleph, Bet, Gimel. And as I was saying, I prayed to Hashem. I said, Hashem, this is all I know. But you know much better. Can you take these letters and form them in the best way possible to have a meaningful davening? And of course, that was a very meaningful davening. The role of us is not to stay ignorant and then just do these things, but it's also to have ultimately deep sense of meaning and sincerity and passion within our prayers. And prayer is that moment of passion and connection that we are able to connect in a different way. That's what prayer ultimately is for building connection. So it is my hope that we can all enhance our prayers, and the ultimate prayer for the coming of the revelation of the truth that exists within this entire world. May it be speedily in our days. Thanks for joining. If anybody has any comments or questions, arguments, debates, feel free. Sorry again for going over time.
Can I share maybe an extra inspiring observation? Is that the lockdown we're experiencing is only 3 dimensions. The prayer takes us beyond that into a dimension that we're not restricted at all.
Yes, it's true. 100%. Prayer does allow us to achieve into that infinite dimension. 100%. Nice. Very good.
Can I ask a question about, so I gather in Kabbalah, there is a form of meditation. Am I right in saying that?
Yes.
Within the Kabbalah.
Kabbalah does talk about unique. In other words, it's not that the Kabbalah has a spirituality in the words of the prayer. So it's about thinking about those Kabbalistic ideas during your prayer. That's the Kabbalistic intention that you have during your prayer, right? But ultimately, they're all different ways of seeing the godliness within the world. Words. Nice question. Okay, David, any comments?
You have a good rest of the week. I have to leave now.
No worries. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.